You don't belong in seat 2A. This ticket must be stolen. Those were the first words flight attendant Sophia Bennett said loud enough for everyone in first class to hear. No greeting, no verification, just a public accusation. Henry Carter didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just blinked. Once, passengers stared. Whispers circled. And in less than 6 minutes, the calm man in charcoal jeans and a black hoodie would unleash a truth powerful enough to flip the entire flight hierarchy and bring down an unspoken system. Because what Sophia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man she had just tried to exile from 2A wasn't just a passenger. He was one of the owners of the airline. And this time, he wasn't going to file a complaint. He was going to deliver a consequence. Before we dive deeper into this true story of power, bias, and a flight no one would forget, comment where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, and if you believe no one should ever be profiled for what they wear, hit that subscribe button and share this story. Now buckle up. Justice is about to take off. Henry Carter stepped onto Skylight Flight SE-247 with nothing but quiet purpose. He didn't dress like power. No suit, no Rolex, just a black hoodie, charcoal jeans, and crisp white sneakers. He carried a leather duffel and a folded boarding pass. Carter, Henry's seat. 2A, Priority 1 clearance confirmed. It was 8:15 a.m. at LAX. First-class boarding had just opened. But tensions were already high. A glitch in Skylight's payment system had caused card rejections across check-in kiosks, bumping passengers off the manifest or downgrading them without warning. Most crew members were scrambling. Flight attendant Sophia Bennett wasn't scrambling. She was scanning, judging. And when Henry crossed the threshold into first class, she didn't see a CEO. She saw a hoodie. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass," she said, arm outstretched like a gate. Henry handed it over wordlessly. Sophia glanced at it for 2 seconds. "This doesn't look right," she said. "You're not on the manifest. This seat is for paying passengers only." Henry's jaw didn't twitch. His eyes didn't flinch. "I am a paying passenger. That's my name. That's my seat." Just then, Lucas Reed, the lead attendant, emerged from the galley. "Problem." Sophia handed over the pass. Lucas glanced at his tablet. "He's not listed." From across the aisle, a crisp voice chimed in. "Probably stole the ticket," said Ethan Ward, a white businessman in a navy suit and watch worth more than most mortgages. He didn't even look up from his phone. Passengers around them turned, some in judgment, some in discomfort. Henry turned slowly toward Ethan. "You said I stole it." Ethan shrugged, not meeting his gaze. "Just saying. Doesn't match the look of this cabin." Sophia's voice rose. "Sir, I'll need you to move to the back of the plane. We'll sort this out later." Henry didn't move. His voice remained even. "No. Verify it now." From row 3C, a young black journalist named Harper Lee had already started filming. Behind Henry, his assistant Mateo Cruz raised Henry's phone and pressed record. Harper zoomed in on Sophia's face. Henry said calmly, "If you touch me, I promise you'll regret it. Just check the list." Again. Sophia folded her arms. "Without verification, you can't sit here," Henry countered. "Then verify it." Harper said loud enough for the row to hear. Just to be clear, he hasn't raised his voice, hasn't threatened anyone. He's just standing in front of a seat that has his name on it. Ethan Ward snorted. Can we not delay the flight for one guy playing dress-up? Henry turned to Mateo. Cruz. Record their names. Sophia Bennett, Lucas Reed, Ethan Ward. Accusations without evidence. Profiling by appearance. Sophia flinched. Lucas muttered, Get security. Harper fired back. He's being profiled. That's a serious claim. Sophia snapped. Profiling, I'm following security protocol. Henry replied, No, you're following fear. Just then, Jack Hayes, seated in 1D, leaned forward. Let me speak to the captain. Sophia dismissed him. This isn't your concern. Jack stood. It became my concern when I saw you accuse a verified passenger based on a hoodie. Sophia's voice cracked. Your platinum card was rejected at the kiosk. Henry's voice cut through her excuse like steel. Your system is broken. I'm not, Mateo whispered. Text sent. Corporate alert activated. Harper raised her phone. This is what profiling looks like. This is how it starts. Lucas turned to Sophia and whispered, Red flag, baggy clothes. Henry froze. What did you just say? Lucas blinked. Nothing. No, Henry said firmly. You said red flag. Baggy clothes. That's internal protocol, isn't it? Lucas stayed silent. Sophia stepped back but didn't apologize. Anyone could fake that ticket. We've had counterfeits before. Henry reached into his pocket, unfolded his ID, and laid it next to the boarding pass. Henry Carter, majority shareholder, Skylight Airlines. Gasps spread through the cabin. Lucas turned pale. Ethan stared. Harper zoomed in. Henry spoke clearly. Scan it. Or don't. Either way, the decision you make in the next 30 seconds will follow you for the rest of your career. Sophia hesitated. And in that silence, everything shifted. Dramatic climax, end of part 2. Henry turned to Mateo. Send the second text. Mateo's fingers flew. Jack returned from the cockpit. The captain says to check the printed manifest. Tablets not reliable. Lucas stepped back. That can't be right. I didn't see his name. Jack handed him the printout. Henry Carter. 2A. Priority 1. Verified. Sophia's face drained of color. Henry stepped forward and said coldly, You just made the worst mistake of your career. Sophia's mouth opened, but no words came. She stared at the printed manifest like it had betrayed her. Henry Carter. 2A. Priority 1. The letters on the paper were undeniable, but she denied them anyway. There must be a system error. That's not possible. He wasn't there before. Henry's voice remained even. I was always there. You just didn't want to see me. Lucas scratched his head, trying to recover his balance. Sometimes the tablet gets out of sync. We've had tech issues all morning. Your transaction probably got flagged when the kiosk froze. Jack Hayes shook his head, handing the manifest back. And instead of investigating the issue properly, you tried to have him removed. Sophia looked down, arms crossed tight. Ethan scoffed again, not bothering to lower his voice. I still say it's suspicious. Hoodie, sneakers, no watch come on. Henry turned to him. You're not looking for truth. You're looking for someone to fit your assumptions. Harper's camera stayed steady. Sir, Lucas began again, trying a gentler tone. We'd like to offer you a drink in business class while we get this sorted. I'm in the correct seat, Henry replied. The seat you tried to deny me. I'm not moving. Sophia's voice rose. Then I'm calling gate security, but Henry was faster. He turned to Mateo. Cruise step 1. Mateo tapped a shortcut on the phone. Corporate verified. Legal looped. Executing discretionary action. Sophia's face went blank. Executing what? Henry stepped forward. I own 40% of this airline. He let that sentence hang in the air like a thundercloud. I'm not just a shareholder. I'm a founder. And my authority extends to any incident where safety, dignity, or brand integrity is compromised. Lucas paled. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying, Henry interrupted. This is no longer an employee disciplinary issue. This is a live ethics breach with full passenger documentation and corporate escalation already in motion. Passengers whispered behind hands. Harper looked over the rim of her phone, just for the record. She said, he hasn't raised his voice once, and she accused him of theft based on a seat number. Jack added, and Mr. Ward here suggested he was playing dress-up. Ethan folded his arms and muttered, This is absurd. Henry raised his voice just enough to be heard by the entire cabin. This is correction. Something that's been too long in coming. Sophia turned to Lucas. Tell them it was the system. Lucas hesitated. It was flagged. But you made the entry adjustment. I saw you. Sophia's mouth dropped open. I marked it for re-verification. That's not a seat change. But it defaulted to economy, Lucas said quietly. That's protocol, and you never told him Harper asked. Sophia looked between them. It was a mistake. That's all. Henry's eyes narrowed. No, he said. It was a pattern. And today, it ends. He walked back toward the galley. Every eye followed. Mateo remained behind him like a shadow with purpose. Henry turned to Sophia. You are relieved of all passenger-facing duties, effective immediately. Sophia froze. Wait, you're firing me. Here. Henry nodded once. Yes. Dramatic climax, end of part 3. Lucas stepped forward. Voice shaking. Are you serious? You're terminating her right now. Henry didn't even blink. She accused me of theft without verification. She attempted to relocate me from a confirmed seat based on appearance. She followed an unwritten, discriminatory protocol and doubled down on it when proven wrong. And she did all of it in front of cameras, passengers, and a journalist documenting the entire exchange. He turned to Harper. Ms. Lee, are you still recording? Harper smiled grimly. Still live. Henry looked back at Sophia. Turn in your badge, leave the galley, and let this moment serve as the new standard. No more warnings. No more excuses. Sophia's hand trembled as she reached for the intercom headset. But Henry was already steps ahead. Calm, composed, controlled. You can make that call. Ms. Bennett, he said. But understand this: every word you speak into that handset will be logged, recorded, and reviewed under my authority. Sophia stopped, not because she wanted to, but because the authority in Henry's voice didn't come from ego. It came from infrastructure, from ownership. Lucas swallowed hard. Maybe we should just wait to de-escalate. Matteo raised Henry's phone without a word and flipped the screen. Live logging corporate compliance review. Timestamp 8/19 M. HR contact. Active legal observing. Harper's camera remained trained on the confrontation. Every breath, every pause. Henry stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to make space for truth. You called me a security risk, Henry said, because of a hoodie. You moved my name off a manifest because a tablet glitched. You judged me based on attire while ignoring policy, process, and protocol. Not only are you fired, you're the first. Sophia's face twisted. First? Henry nodded. I'm launching a new directive. He turned slightly toward the cabin so every passenger could hear. It's called Skyfare. Effective immediately. It introduces zero-tolerance policies on appearance-based profiling, public accusations without verification, and undocumented removal requests. Sophia blinked. That's not in the handbook. Henry replied, I write the handbook. Lucas whispered to Harper. Stunned. He came prepared. This wasn't just about a seat. Harper kept filming. It never is. Henry turned to Lucas. You're not off the hook. Lucas stiffened. You reinforced her accusation. You supported a removal without checking the paper manifest. You implied I didn't look like a first-class passenger. You didn't act like a leader. You followed fear. Lucas dropped his eyes. I'll cooperate with whatever review is necessary. Henry didn't blink. You'll do more than cooperate. You'll expose everything. Sophia tried one last tactic. This is harassment. I was just doing my job. Harper stepped in. No, you were hiding behind your job. That's different. Ethan muttered. I still don't get it. So now every mistake's a lawsuit. Harper turned her camera on him. No, but every pattern is a problem. Just then, the cabin phone rang. Lucas picked it up, listened, then handed it to Henry. Corporate is asking for confirmation of your directive. Henry took the phone. This is Carter. Authorization ID 40DX1 shareholder. I am executing flight-level disciplinary override under Section 7. Pause. Then, yes, effective immediately. He handed the phone back to Lucas. Harper whispered, That's the sound of the sky changing. Dramatic climax, end of part 4. Henry turned toward the galley again. Matteo stepped forward and pulled a small envelope from Henry's duffel. He handed it to Sophia. Confused, she opened it. Inside a copy of her own training transcript, highlighted in yellow. All passenger concerns must be verified before removal. No assumptions. No appearance-based actions. No exceptions. Her signature at the bottom. You knew, Henry said, voice like thunder through glass. You were trained. You were reminded. You were warned. And yet you made me your suspect. Sophia stepped back, breath catching in her throat. Henry raised his voice just slightly. You're not being fired for a mistake. You're being fired for choosing comfort over character. Sophia stood in the narrow galley, the weight of Henry's words cracking her composure like ice under pressure. She clutched the envelope containing her signed training transcript as if it could shield her from the truth now washing over her in waves. Harper's camera lens stayed locked on her face. Mateo's phone recorded from the side. Lucas stood rigid, silent, shamed, still unsure if he was next. Henry didn't press. He waited. Because power didn't need to shout. It simply needed to be known. "Ms. Bennett," he said quietly, "you just learned what it feels like when accountability doesn't come with delay." Sophia's voice came out smaller than it had minutes ago. "So that's it. One decision, and my whole career is gone." Henry stepped closer. "One decision." "You made several. You judged. You assumed. You escalated. You refused to check facts. And when confronted, you doubled down instead of stepping back." He paused. "One decision didn't end your career. A chain of unspoken habits did." Ethan let out an exasperated breath from his seat. "Okay, this is getting theatrical." Jack Hayes turned to him. "No. This is the first time some people are seeing what the inside of an invisible system looks like." Ethan scoffed. What system? She misread a manifest and got chewed out. Harper raised her camera. She misread a man and tried to remove him. That's not a typo. That's profiling. Sophia's face flushed. "I already said it wasn't about race." Henry tilted his head. "Then what was it about?" Sophia hesitated. "We've had cases people sneaking up front, dressed down, walking fast. We're told to watch for that." "Who told you?" Henry asked. Sophia's gaze flickered to Lucas. He looked away. Lucas spoke slowly. "They don't put it in writing, but the culture, there's guidance." Henry nodded. "Unwritten rules, red flags based on hoodie, sneakers, no watch, not policy pattern." He looked at Sophia. "And when it's unwritten, it becomes dangerous, because it gives cover to every bias hiding behind a barcode scanner." Jack folded his arms. "What I saw today wasn't policy. It was personal." Harper zoomed in. It was rehearsed. Sophia's eyes darted. "I thought I was protecting the cabin." Henry countered. "You were protecting the comfort of people who look like Ethan." Ethan barked a laugh. "Now I'm the villain." Harper answered before Henry could. "No, you're the echo." Mateo stepped forward. "Corporate confirms. Sophia's badge deactivated. Payroll lock initiated." Sophia stiffened. "You're enjoying this?" Henry didn't flinch. There's no enjoyment in fixing what should never have been broken. A chime sounded overhead. The captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. There was a technical discrepancy involving a manifest listing. It has been resolved. Boarding is now complete." Harper whispered. "No mention of what really happened." Henry shook his head. "That's the difference between resolution and reform. I'm here for the second." Sophia finally spoke again, but this time her voice was thin, almost hollow. "I didn't expect you to be someone important." Henry gave a half smile. "I know." He turned to the other passengers. "And that's the real problem, isn't it? The assumption that power wears a tailored suit, that dignity comes with a briefcase, that status can't exist inside a hoodie." Harper lowered her camera for a second. "I've covered 15 discrimination cases in transit. This is the first time I've seen consequences arrive before landing." Henry nodded. "Because this time, the man in 2A didn't just have a story. He had authority." Dramatic climax, end of part 5. Sophia set her badge down on the silver tray beside the coffee cart. She didn't say another word. Lucas looked at it then at Henry. "I'll help with the investigation," he said quietly. Henry's eyes didn't soften. "You won't help because it's noble. You'll help because you owe it to the people who've been flagged and erased without anyone watching." Then he turned to the cabin. Today isn't about making an example. It's about ending a ritual, and with that, he sat finally in seat 2A. Not as a guest, but as a warning. Henry Carter eased into seat 2A, as if reclaiming something more than legroom, something taken from him long ago. The whisper of leather, the click of his seatbelt, the quiet exhale. For most, it was a simple act. For Henry, it was a declaration. Across the aisle, passengers who had silently watched the altercation now shifted uneasily, not because of fear, but because the truth had rearranged their comfort. Harper lowered her phone for the first time since the confrontation began. Her hands trembled not from adrenaline, but from the weight of validation. Mateo leaned in. Corporate pinged back. Skyfare protocol greenlit. Full initiative rollout immediate. Henry nodded without looking up. "Then we start here. On this flight. In front of everyone." Lucas still stood frozen near the galley, his manifest tablet glowing in his hands. His voice broke the tension. "Sir, what? What do we tell the rest of the crew?" Henry didn't look at him either. "Tell them what happened. Don't water it down. Don't dress it up. Just say we almost removed a verified passenger because of his hoodie. And today, that costs more than an apology." Sophia stood further back now, near the exit row bulkhead, her headset off, her name badge turned upside down. She had been officially removed, but she hadn't left yet. And Henry knew why. It wasn't disbelief. It was reckoning. He turned to Mateo. "We need witness statements, full documentation from passengers, every word logged, nothing verbal typed or on camera." Mateo was already ahead of him, starting with Harper. Harper raised her hand, already compiling timestamps and quotes. Lucas hesitated, then stepped into the aisle. "I'll gather statements, too." Henry's eyes met his for the first time since the reprimand. "You'll get no special credit for fixing what you helped create, but you'll help." Lucas nodded once. Jack Hayes shifted in his seat. "What you're doing, you realize this doesn't happen. Not at 35,000 feet. Not before takeoff." Henry replied, "Exactly why it needs to." Ethan, still slouched in 1C, rolled his eyes. "You think rewriting a policy mid-flight changes anything?" Henry leaned toward the aisle. "I don't think. I know. Because this flight has already changed you." Ethan scoffed. "Not me." Harper added softly, "Then you're the reason it has to keep changing." A mother 2 rows back tapped Mateo's shoulder. She gestured toward her son, maybe 12, wide-eyed, black, wearing a Spider-Man hoodie. "Can he shake, Mr. Carter's hand?" she whispered. Mateo looked to Henry. Henry smiled. The boy approached, nervous. Henry stood. He knelt slightly to meet his eyes. "What's your name?" "Zion." "You ever been told you don't belong somewhere?" Zion nodded. Henry extended his hand. "Then remember this. Zion. Next time they say that, you own the seat." The entire cabin went silent. Then something remarkable happened. Jack Hayes started clapping, a slow, deliberate clap. Not for drama, but for dignity. Then Harper joined, then the mother. And soon, the quiet cabin that had once judged Henry in silence began to applaud his presence. Not because he was rich, not because he was powerful, but because he had dared to sit and stay. Sophia watched from the galley door, her cheeks burning. She wasn't the center anymore. She wasn't in control, and Henry didn't need to say another word. Because the silence had turned. Dramatic climax, end of part 6, the captain's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, Skylight. Thanks you for your patience. Flight 247 is now cleared for departure. We will begin taxi shortly. Our full crew is ready to serve. Then came a pause. A breath. Then, we also thank Mr. Henry Carter for helping us uphold the values we aim to represent. On behalf of the flight team, welcome aboard. Sophia's eyes widened. Lucas exhaled. Harper captured the announcement on camera. And Henry, he simply adjusted his seatbelt and said, "Now we're cleared for something bigger than takeoff." The plane lifted gently off the runway, its engines humming like a drum roll for a new kind of accountability. Henry Carter stared out the oval window from seat 2A, no longer a symbol of status, but of resistance, of rectification. Below him, Los Angeles shrank into grids and shadows. Beside him, Mateo whispered, "Messages from 3 executives just came in. They've seen the footage." Henry didn't turn his head. Good. Make sure they know we're not delaying the audit. This isn't about headlines. It's about housekeeping. Across the aisle. Harper Lee pulled out a spare battery for her phone. She had captured everything: the accusations, the reversal, the firing, and now the flight. She began editing in real time, tagging segments. Timestamp 0812. Accusation without evidence 0819. ID reveal and board authority declared 0824. Termination initiated 0833. Skyfair protocol announced. Each clip, a nail in the coffin of unwritten prejudice. Each clip, a blueprint for change. Lucas remained in the forward galley, mechanically preparing drinks. No headset, no authority, just motion. A few minutes later, he walked to Henry's row. "I've drafted an internal statement. About today. About how I failed to verify." Henry accepted the paper, scanned it. "You're owning it," he said. "That's the first step. But I don't need apologies. I need the pattern exposed." Lucas nodded. "You'll get it. And I want to be the one to help dismantle it." Henry met his gaze. "Then prepare to lose friends. People you trained with. Flew with." "I already have," Lucas said softly. Meanwhile, a young couple in 4D and 4F leaned into the aisle, whispering. That was him. Right. The guy from the business magazine. "I didn't know he was black. That's the point," the woman said. "He's not what they expected. And that's exactly why this happened." At the rear of first class, Sophia sat in jump seat limbo, stripped of duties, uniform still on, but title gone. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out. An email. Subject line, Flight 247 Incident. Internal Review Notification. Body. "Ms. Bennett, you're under active investigation pending permanent removal. Corporate liaison will debrief upon landing. She put the phone away. No tears, just the dull ache of a reality she had built with one assumption too many. Back in 2A, Henry read over Lucas's statement again. One line caught his attention. I believed the tablet more than the person standing in front of me. He underlined it. That, Henry said, is going in the training manual. Harper looked up from her phone. What happens when you try to train bias out of a system built to ignore it? Henry replied without missing a beat. You don't train it out. You design it out. You build fail-safes that force verification. You automate dignity. Just then, a middle-aged white man in a blazer seat 3A stood and approached Henry. Mr. Carter, he said cautiously, I just wanted to say, I saw it. I stayed quiet. And I'm sorry I did. Henry looked up. You believed her, didn't you? The man didn't deny it. I didn't question it. Not once. Then let this remind you, Henry said. Silence isn't neutral. It's complicit. The man nodded and returned to his seat. Dramatic climax, end of part 7. Mateo's phone pinged again. A different tone. He handed it to Henry. It's a message from the chairman. Henry read it silently. Saw the footage. Unacceptable on all levels. Do what you must. Skyfair has my full backing. Chairman V. Demas. Henry looked out the window again. Clouds below them. Consequences above, and for the first time on a skylight flight. The air felt clear. The hum of the engine softened as the plane reached cruising altitude. Flight SE-247 was officially airborne, but everyone on board knew they were already part of a story that would never land the same way. Henry Carter didn't need a podium. Seat 2A was his platform now, and justice had taken flight. Mateo leaned across the armrest, lowering his voice. Media pinging already. 3 outlets want comment. 1 from London, 1 from Atlanta, 1 from inside Skylight's own PR team. Henry didn't flinch. No press releases. No quotes. Mateo blinked. None. We let the footage speak first. Let them chew on silence. It's stronger than spin. A few rows back, Harper was uploading time-stamped clips to a secure folder. Not public, yet just backed up. Insured. She wasn't just recording history. She was curating truth. Lucas sat 2 seats away from her. Scribbling. He'd already filled 2 pages in his notebook. Confessionals, as he called them. Patterns. Phrases. The quiet normalization of microaggressions he'd once called just intuition. Henry turned toward Mateo again. Begin the review. Mateo tapped rapidly. Done. Compliance team alerted. Ethics board CC'd. Pilot looped in for incident debrief on landing. Henry leaned back. This won't be buried. A light knock on the side of his seat. Henry turned. It was the boy again, Zion this time, with his mother. Mr. Carter, she whispered. Can I ask you something? Henry smiled. Of course. She looked nervous. Then said, How do you stay calm when everyone is trying to unseat you? Henry looked at her for a long moment before answering. You stay calm when you know your seat isn't just printed on paper. It's earned in legacy. You stay calm when you've already built the system they tried to gatekeep. Harper, overhearing, typed that line instantly. Zion reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a notebook. Will you sign it? Henry did writing only. Zion never asked permission to be seen. Back in the galley, Sophia sat with her head lowered. The words relieved of duty still echoed behind her eyes. Her tablet buzzed. Another message. Legal preparing termination packet. Board action pending. Please refrain from passenger contact. Her breath caught. She was still in uniform, but her career had already taken off without her. Lucas approached the galley, hesitant. He carried the notebook he'd been filling. Sophia looked up. You came to gloat. He shook his head. I came to say I was part of the silence, and I'm done with it. Sophia snorted. Easy for you. You get to keep your job. Lucas looked down. Maybe. But I don't get to keep my comfort. That's gone now. Back in 2A, Mateo received another ping. Sir, Skylight's HR just flagged 6 previous complaints tied to profiling. 3 involved Sophia. 2 were dismissed. 1 was marked as passenger confusion. Henry narrowed his eyes. Time to unconfuse the system. He turned to Harper. Ready to do more than film. Harper lifted her head. Try me. I want you on the ethics committee for Skyfair. Independent advisor. Full clearance. Harper blinked. I'm a journalist. Exactly, Henry said. You're trained to see what others overlook. Dramatic climax, end of part 8. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the cockpit. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've received word that due to an internal review request, our arrival gate at JFK has changed. Security and senior staff will be waiting to meet this flight. Henry smiled slightly. Jack Hayes, seated nearby, raised an eyebrow. That for you. Henry nodded. It's for all of us. Then he stood, turned toward the first-class cabin, and spoke for everyone to hear. In aviation, one glitch can ground a flight, but one truth can reset an entire system. And Flight SE-247 wasn't just in the air. It was part of a movement now. As Flight SE-247 coasted smoothly at 36,000 feet, it wasn't altitude that made the passengers sit straighter. It was awareness. An unspoken current pulsed through the cabin, something between reverence and discomfort. This wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a tribunal in motion, and Henry Carter, still seated in 2A, had just turned a personal humiliation into public recalibration. A teenage girl from row 5 stood quietly and approached Mateo. I didn't film anything, she whispered, but I wrote everything down, if you want it. Mateo smiled and handed her a business card. We'll make sure your witness statement is part of the record. Behind her, an older man in business attire nodded at Henry as he passed by to use the restroom, not with disdain, but with respect. Not for what Henry said, but for what he didn't allow to continue. In the galley, Lucas was now organizing a packet of digital files, staff policy revisions, outdated bias training guidelines, and most damning, a recorded internal memo that quietly recommended attendants double-check appearance discrepancies in first class. Mateo uploaded the file straight into compliance. Subject line: the quiet policy that spoke volumes. Back in 2A, Harper approached, holding her phone like a scalpel. Henry, she said, your story's already trending. I didn't even upload the video publicly yet. Just keywords from the transcript. He didn't react. Instead, he asked, What's the top comment? Harper checked. This man didn't get angry. He got even with accountability. Henry gave a slight nod. That's all I ever wanted. Just then, a crew member, not Sophia, offered Henry a drink. We apologize for earlier, sir. Henry looked up. Don't apologize on behalf of someone who hasn't apologized themselves. The attendant froze. Then Lucas appeared behind her. I will. He took a breath, loud enough for passengers nearby to hear. I reinforced a lie. I used protocol to mask a bias, and I failed to lead. I apologize. Henry stared at him. Then prove it. From the rear, Ethan stood again. Okay, seriously. Are we going to fly this whole trip like it's a courtroom? Harper didn't even look at him. Sit down. Ethan, your seat doesn't come with a microphone. Ethan raised his arms. Oh, so I'm just the designated villain now, Jack Hayes interjected. No, Ethan, you designated yourself. The moment you opened your mouth and said, people like him don't sit in first class. Sophia, still seated in the galley, watched the cabin turn. She'd never felt more visible and more irrelevant. Her headset lay unplugged on the counter beside her badge. She thought of speaking again, thought of explaining. But what could she say? The silence she helped enforce had finally turned against her. Up front, Mateo received another alert. Henry. Compliance pulled 2 more flagged incidents. One involved a black woman asked to step out of the VIP lounge until her boss arrived. Another was a veteran in uniform denied boarding because his boots weren't polished. Henry's jaw clenched. How many stories like mine never made it to 2A? He stood again and turned to face the first-class cabin. This is your flight, he said evenly, but it's also your mirror. Whatever seat you're in, ask yourself what it took to get there, and who never made it because someone decided they didn't look the part. Harper zoomed in as passengers leaned forward. Henry continued, privilege is quiet, but so is bias. Until someone chooses not to be. Dramatic climax, end of part 9. Suddenly, the cabin lights flickered. A gentle tremor rocked the plane a patch of turbulence. The seatbelt sign blinked on. But no one moved, because in that moment, the most unsettling shake wasn't from the clouds. It was the realization that for years, people like Henry had endured worse than turbulence. They'd endured the silence of systems designed to erase them without raising their voice. And today, that silence had been grounded. The turbulence passed quickly, but the impact of Henry Carter's words remained suspended in the air like a verdict that couldn't be undone. Passengers who had originally dismissed the confrontation now watched Henry with quiet reverence. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't pulled rank immediately. And that restraint, that composure, had struck deeper than any outburst could, because restraint wasn't weakness. It was power waiting for precision. Lucas returned to the front of the cabin with Mateo's help, logging documents into Skylight's secure incident platform. He tapped his manifest tablet, refreshing passenger records, and noticed something odd. Sophia's override on Henry's seat had already been corrected and archived, but something else was flagged. 4 other passengers on prior flights had been moved from first to economy, all with similar notations. Manifest discrepancy due to appearance concern. Flagged for review. Lucas looked at Henry. There's a list, he said quietly. You're not the first. They just didn't fight. Henry didn't look surprised, just disappointed. Then we owe them more than policy. We owe them acknowledgement. Matteo chimed in. Update from legal. They want your signature on the Skyfair directive by touchdown. HR says it can launch within 24 hours. Henry nodded slowly. Make sure it includes a clause every attendant undergoes quarterly anti-bias simulation training. Real scenarios, not theory. Matteo took note. And if someone refuses, then they don't fly. A man from row 6 quietly walked forward. Asian, mid-50s. Glasses fogged slightly. He extended a hand toward Henry. I've sat in seat 2C before, but never felt like I belonged there. I do now, because you stayed seated. Henry shook his hand. Next time someone questions your presence, tell them I belong here because I chose not to disappear. Back in the galley. Sophia removed her blazer and folded it neatly. She set it beside the tray cart as if letting go of rank, of facade, of denial. She hadn't said another word since the formal termination was declared, but her silence wasn't proud anymore. It was the sound of someone realizing that the policies she once trusted had betrayed her. 2. Matteo's phone buzzed again. He passed it to Henry. Security team confirmed. They'll be waiting at gate C17 with legal counsel. You'll be escorted directly to internal debrief. Henry handed it back. I'll walk out like everyone else. I wasn't the problem. They were. Harper looked up. You're not worried this will make you a target? Henry finally allowed a small laugh. I've been a target since I wore my first hoodie into a boardroom. What I'm becoming now is a mirror. Lucas cleared his throat. I spoke to one of our newer flight attendants last month. She asked if it was okay to question a passenger who looked out of place. I told her, use your instincts. He swallowed hard. I realize now, what I called instinct was just legacy bias repackaged. Henry nodded, and that's what gets passed down when we don't confront the original wound. Passengers had begun whispering, nodding, some even writing. It wasn't a riot. It was a reckoning. Quiet, unapologetic, necessary. Sophia finally stood. She didn't walk out. She walked forward, eyes still down, but hands unclenched. She approached Henry not too close and said, I can't undo it, but I can say it. I was wrong. Henry looked at her. Unreadable. Wrong for assuming. Wrong for escalating. Wrong for thinking the uniform made me immune to being held accountable. I didn't profile you because of your clothes. Pause. I profiled you because I didn't expect power to come in your skin. The cabin froze. Even Ethan, silent, now looked up. Henry's expression didn't change. Thank you, he said. Then added, that admission isn't for me. It's for the hundreds who'll never hear it, but live its echo every day. Sophia nodded once, then turned and walked back to the jump seat. Not escorted. Not dramatic, just done. Dramatic climax, end of part 10. Matteo turned to Henry one last time. Sir, Ethics Board wants to add your line to the program launch. What line? The one you told Zion. You don't have to ask permission to be seen. Henry smiled faintly. Then tell them to print it, because this wasn't just about one flight. It was about every seat that was ever questioned because the occupant didn't come dressed as expected. And now, for the first time, expectations were being rewritten. The seatbelt sign remained on, but the real turbulence had long passed. In its place, awareness, accountability, and quiet vindication. Flight SE-247 was no longer just traveling from LAX to JFK. It had become a vessel of reckoning, a flying courtroom where silence finally lost its grip. And in seat 2A, Henry Carter wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was policy. Mateo sat across the aisle now, texting the ethics team. Board support confirmed. Legal moving forward. SOPs for Skyfair to enter drafting phase tonight. He looked up. Do we include the training clause about appearance profiling? Henry nodded. Front and center. No exceptions. No soft language. Harper leaned in from her seat nearby. Want help with the language? I've covered civil litigation for 5 years. Henry smiled. Then you know how they wiggle through vague clauses, Harper replied. That's why I don't write vague. 2 rows back, a white woman in her 60s raised her hand, slightly timid. Mateo approached. I just wanted to say, I thought you were the aggressor at first. When it started, Henry turned to listen. She continued, because I'm used to seeing black men on the news only when something goes wrong. She winced. That's not an excuse. That's my conditioning. Henry offered her a nod of acknowledgement. You're not wrong for having bias, he said. You're wrong if you let it run the cockpit. In the galley, Lucas was now compiling policy recommendations. Mateo had handed him a blank framework. Start with this, Henry had told him. What would have prevented what happened in this cabin? Lucas wrote. No verbal accusation without ID verification. No override of seat assignments without double-checking manifest. No assumptions based on attire alone. No deference to passenger complaints without confirming facts. Mateo added a final line. Every mistake logged. Every bias documented. Every consequence traceable. Sophia hadn't moved in 15 minutes. She stared ahead, the jump seat safety straps still around her. Her headset buzzed another message. She didn't touch it. She knew what it was, because when you've already been ejected by consequence, a ping from legal is just an echo. Harper began composing her article. It wouldn't be published immediately, but it was writing itself. The Man in 2A. How a Black CEO Grounded a Culture Mid-Flight. She wrote, this wasn't a meltdown. This wasn't overreaction. This was what justice looks like at 36,000 feet. Calm. Documented. Irrefutable. Meanwhile, passengers continued to whisper. Did you hear what he said about designing bias out of the system? He didn't even get mad. He didn't need to. That's what made it powerful. Ethan slouched in his seat, arms crossed, eyes shut, but not asleep. He was retreating, because now the spotlight had moved. And for once, he wasn't in control of it. A soft chime rang through the cabin. The flight crew made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning initial descent into JFK. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Mateo leaned over. They'll be waiting at the gate. Henry didn't flinch. Good. So will we. A child's voice piped up from row 6. Mom, why did the man in the hoodie fix the airplane? Laughter fluttered through the rows. His mom smiled, because he saw something broken. Dramatic climax, end of part 11. Henry stood one last time before landing and addressed the cabin not with rage, but with resolve. He said, "Your seat isn't just where you sit. It's where you're seen, and no system manual, manifest, or mistaken assumption should ever decide who gets to be visible." Silence followed, but not the kind that hides injustice. The kind that honors transformation. And in that moment, everyone knew. This plane hadn't just crossed time zones, it had crossed a threshold. The wheels of Flight SE-247 touched down on the runway at JFK with a smoothness that belied the storm that had passed in the skies above. But for those seated in first class, especially in 2A, the real descent had nothing to do with altitude. It was the system that had been brought down. The moment the plane began taxiing, phones across the cabin lit up. Messages, alerts, news pings. The silence between passengers shifted from awkward to electric. The flight had landed, but the story it had just taken off. Mateo refreshed his dashboard, trending top 20 on 2 platforms. Keywords from Harper's draft went viral before the plane even touched down. Harper raised her eyebrow. "I didn't even publish the full article." Henry nodded. "You didn't need to. Truth writes its own runway." Lucas, pale but focused, handed Henry the latest compliance sheet. The audit team back home already pulled 30 archived complaints previously filed under passenger miscommunication. 22 involved appearance-based disputes, 12 from crew still flying today. Henry scanned the list. Every single one gets reviewed, manually. No more automated apologies. No more corporate evasion. The PA system beeped. Flight attendants, prepare doors for arrival and cross-check. Sophia, still seated in the rear, stiffened. For years, that phrase had signaled closure. Today, it signaled exposure. Her role, her assumption, her reaction every second was now logged, time-stamped, and replayed in a system that no longer protected silence. A crew member approached Henry with a sealed envelope. This was sent directly from HQ. They said to deliver it upon landing. Henry opened it. Inside a one-page letter from Skylight Airlines' executive board, "Your authority to initiate Skyfare has been unanimously confirmed. We are removing the previous training framework, effective immediately. You are to lead the public statement at tomorrow's press briefing. Thank you for standing your ground in every sense." Henry folded the letter neatly. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just said, "Good." Because this was never about one seat. As the aircraft taxied toward Gate C-17, ground staff could be seen assembling outside security personnel, corporate liaisons, even Skylight's senior HR officer. Ethan Ward peeked out the window. "Jesus, looks like a press conference," Harper replied coolly. "No, just what happens when the altitude drops, and the truth finally lands." Passengers began gathering their belongings, but no one stood. They all waited. Watched. Not out of fear. Out of respect for Henry. For the moment, for accountability. Sophia finally stood, her blazer folded over her arm, headset tucked away, no crew badge. No title, just the woman who once said, "This seat must be stolen." And now, her career was what had been taken. Lucas walked behind her, holding his own tablet glowing with pending case files, correction forms, and internal statements he never thought he'd have to file. A soft voice behind him whispered, "You're not hiding anymore." Lucas turned. It was a young flight attendant, early 20s. "No," he replied. "I'm helping rewrite it." Dramatic climax, end of part 12. The jet bridge aligned. The door opened. But before any passenger could step off, Henry stood, turned to face the entire cabin, and said, "I walked onto this flight wearing a hoodie. And I'll walk off of it rewriting policy. But the bigger win isn't that I stayed in 2A. It's that someone else next time won't be stopped from taking their seat at all." Then, with Matteo behind him, Henry Carter stepped into the terminal. No fanfare, no entourage, just the kind of presence that didn't need permission anymore. The doors of Flight SE-247 slid open with a soft hiss, releasing the cabin from its pressurized crucible. But what stepped off the plane wasn't just a man in a hoodie. It was a reckoning. A gate agent standing by the jet bridge adjusted his tie when he saw Henry Carter. Behind him stood 2 corporate liaisons, 1 legal counsel, and 3 Skylight Airlines executives. No cameras, no flashes. Just consequence in a tailored row of silence. Henry nodded respectfully. The executives said nothing. They didn't need to. Their presence was the answer to a question the airline had avoided for years. What happens when bias is caught mid-flight and can't be ignored? Behind Henry, Matteo carried 2 things: Henry's duffel bag and a tablet still syncing audio and footage to the legal archive. And behind Matteo, Harper stepped off, holding her phone like a weapon of transparency. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She knew this was the moment they always try to rewrite. Sophia stepped into the jet bridge last. She held her ID badge in her hand like a memory fading. No one stopped her. No one comforted her, because justice isn't cruel. It's exact. Lucas followed, shoulders squared, manifest tablet still clutched like an apology. He approached the executive group and said quietly, "I'll submit to full review. I failed to lead, but I want to help fix it." An older executive, eyes cold but not unkind, nodded once. "Then your next assignment starts now." Inside the terminal, a private conference room had been reserved. The table was bare, except for 6 binders marked Skyfare Draft, Suppressed Complaints, SOP Reform, Media Protocol, Flight SE-247 Log, Personnel Action. Henry took his seat at the head without hesitation. For the first time, he didn't have to justify why he belonged at the table. He had brought the table with him. Harper entered last. She placed a folded note on the table. "Here's the working headline," she said, "but it's your story now." The title read, "A Hoodie Entered First Class. A Culture Was Grounded." Matteo passed it to Henry, who read it aloud once and nodded. "Make it the tagline for Skyfare." One of the executives leaned forward. "We've never had a shareholder initiate policy-level reform from the cabin floor." Henry replied, "Then maybe that's the problem." He stood, pointing to the binder labeled Suppressed Complaints. This is why flight crews act like security guards instead of stewards. Because when they profile someone and get away with it, it becomes habit. And habit becomes culture. Another executive murmured, "So how do you break it?" Harper answered before Henry could. You name it. Out loud. In training, in meetings, in onboarding. You say the word you're all afraid of. Discrimination. A young assistant entered with a tray of water bottles. She paused beside Henry and whispered, Thank you, sir. My cousin works at the Houston terminal. He's been sidelined twice for asking about crew misconduct. Maybe now he can speak. Henry gave a subtle nod, because real change wasn't in press releases. It was in whispers, turning into policy. Dramatic climax, end of part 13. Just as the meeting began, Henry's phone buzzed. A message from Skylight's internal ethics board. We've reinstated 3 passengers who were improperly demoted due to profiling. Full upgrades. Personal apologies, signed by board chair. We're also drafting an airline-wide bulletin for immediate release, first of its kind. Henry turned to the room and said, This isn't just a flight report. It's a blueprint for every airline, every crew, every gatekeeper. Because if you can profile someone in 6 minutes, we can build justice faster. And with that, the Skyfare era began. The ink on the Skyfare directive was still drying, but the cultural shift it represented had already begun to ripple outward faster than any aircraft. Within 24 hours of Henry Carter stepping off Flight SE-247, internal memos zipped through Skylight Airlines' headquarters. Crew group chats lit up with shock, and a quiet wave of introspection swept through every terminal, tarmac, and cabin in the company. This wasn't a training update. This was a doctrine. Henry didn't take a break. He sat in a glass conference room on the 27th floor of Skylight's Manhattan Tower, staring at a wall of archived incident reports now projected on the screen. Each report had been filed under vague language: uncooperative passenger, suspected misboarding, disruption due to a tire. Each of them had a pattern, and that pattern had a face. Lucas sat beside him, sweating under the weight of responsibility. Most of these were auto-closed within 12 hours. Passengers never even got follow-up calls. Harper added, because the algorithm closes tickets with no crew-confirmed misconduct. Henry didn't look away from the screen. So if the fox reports on the henhouse, the report vanishes. Mateo stepped in, placing a file on the table. We've got 8 internal whistleblowers from 4 different airports. 3 are still employed. 5 left because of suppression. 1 says their manager told them to check dress code before checking names. Henry exhaled. We don't need reform. We need excavation. Meanwhile, Sophia Bennett sat in a Skylight HR holding room, awaiting formal termination proceedings. No uniform, no headset, no shield, the same mouth that once declared, "This seat must be stolen," now said nothing at all. Because for the first time, silence wasn't protection, it was evidence. Lucas looked at Henry. "Sir, if I may, how do you rebuild trust with employees who learned silence as survival?" Henry replied, "You don't rebuild it. You replace it. You create systems that reward truth louder than comfort." Across the country, flight attendants were receiving Skyfare packets complete with updated bias response flowcharts, mandatory incident de-escalation modules, direct QR codes for internal ethics reporting, footage from Flight SE-247 used as training baseline. The words that once echoed in fear, "You don't belong in 2A," now played in classrooms as a warning. Harper narrated the training's intro. Welcome to Skyfair. This isn't compliance. This is conscience. Passengers began noticing the difference, not just in greetings, but in posture, in eye contact, in presence. Crew members once quick to demand ID now verified calmly out loud, with acknowledgement, not assumption. As Harper noted, the cabin didn't get quieter. It got fairer. Henry stood in front of the Skylight executive team the next day. Behind him, a floor-to-ceiling screen displayed metrics in real time. 6,221 new internal reports, 72 complaints reclassified as verified misconduct. 3 crew members removed from rotation pending review, and 1 banner headline from Harper's first full article. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. Henry turned to the team. This isn't the end. This is the minimum. Dramatic climax, end of part 14. Then, Henry dropped a final report on the table. It was from Houston. A story he hadn't told anyone. At 23, I was denied boarding while wearing a conference badge with my face on it. The agent laughed and said, "You're the keynote. You dress like a rideshare driver." That wasn't the moment I got angry. That was the moment I promised. One day, my name wouldn't just be on the badge. It would be on the building. He paused. And then quietly said, "That building is Skylight. And we're not done building." 5 days after the flight, Skylight Airlines released a press bulletin unlike any it had issued before. Subject Skyfair Program. Launch and company-wide cultural review. Tone not defensive, not diluted, not damage control. Message. We failed to hear. We failed to see. We now choose to act. The headline made international news, but the fine print, that's where the shift lived. All complaints involving appearance-based seating reclassified as bias risk alerts. Termination protocol outlined for any employee found to suppress or mislabel incidents. Skyfair designated a mandatory system-wide culture initiative, not a diversity program. This wasn't for PR. This was for repair. Henry Carter didn't take interviews. He didn't need to. But everywhere he went, the hoodie did the talking. When he walked into boardrooms, first-class lounges, and ethics briefings wearing the same black hoodie from Flight SE-247 executives straightened in their chairs. Gate agents stopped mid-sentence. Crew members whispered. Because that hoodie now carried weight. It had survived assumption, accusation, and altitude. And now, it carried policy. Mateo walked into Henry's office one morning with 2 items. One was a printed thank you letter from a black woman who said she was finally able to board a plane without a stranger double-checking her ticket. The second was a velvet case. Inside the original boarding pass from Flight SE-247, laminated in crystal, Henry didn't display it on a shelf. He carried it in his briefcase, just in case anyone ever asked, "Do you have your credentials?" Lucas, now reassigned to ethics training compliance, began conducting sessions for flight crews. His first words each time, "I'm not here to protect you. I'm here to help you unlearn." And every session ended with one question. When was the last time you second-guessed someone because of how they looked? The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Sophia Bennett had been officially dismissed. Her exit interview was optional, but she chose to attend. When asked why, she said, Because if I don't say it in this room, I'll carry it forever. She didn't plead for her job. She testified against the culture. We were taught to look at shoes, brands, posture. We called it instinct, but it was a checklist of exclusion dressed as vigilance. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She gave context, and Henry made sure her statement was included in every training module. Not to shame her, but to warn others. Harper's article was republished across 9 outlets. But what changed her life was the message she received from a journalism student. You made me realize that filming injustice is journalism, too. You pointed the lens, and you didn't blink. Harper replied simply, "The lens is only as brave as the person holding it." 1 week later, Henry boarded another flight, this time to London. Same hoodie. Same duffel. Same 2A. A different flight crew this time. A different energy. He was greeted with dignity, offered a beverage, and left alone. But halfway through the flight, a crew member approached quietly. "Sir, I reviewed your Skyfare footage 3 times. I cried." Henry looked at him. "Not because it hurt," the attendant added, "but because I saw myself in Sophia, and I realized I never questioned the checklist." Henry nodded. Now you will. Dramatic climax, end of part 15. As the flight reached cruising altitude, the pilot made an unusual announcement. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today's flight carries a special passenger. If you've ever doubted the power of a quiet man in a hoodie, look to 2A. And remember, dignity doesn't need a dress code." The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Henry didn't stand. He didn't wave. He just looked out the window, hands folded. Because justice, when real, doesn't require a spotlight. It just needs altitude. The moment Henry Carter stepped off the plane at Heathrow, the air felt different, not because of the weather, but because of the weight he now carried. He wasn't a passenger anymore. He was precedent. A black car waited for him outside Terminal 5, windows tinted, engine humming. The driver offered no chit-chat, only a quiet, "Welcome back, Mr. Carter." But even as the city blurred past the windows, Henry's mind was still back in the skies, thinking about the flight attendant who offered him tea without hesitation, the fellow passenger who smiled instead of staring, and the complete absence of one word he'd once grown used to hearing in first class. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Back in New York, Skyfare's second stage implementation had already begun. Matteo ran the rollout like an engineer assembling a rocket fast, precise, with no tolerance for misfires. He scheduled round-the-clock compliance workshops across 22 hubs, created internal reporting dashboards, and even brought Harper in to co-lead case simulations based on real complaints. Her opening line: "The difference between instinct and profiling is one breath. Take it before you speak." Lucas, now traveling between cities to audit old complaints, unearthed dozens of passenger statements long buried under "no escalation needed" tags. He brought one to Henry personally. A note from a 19-year-old black student named Nia Thompson, dated 18 months prior. "I was told my look raised flags. They said I should dress more like a scholar next time. I was flying home from a scholarship interview. Her complaint had been marked resolved. No misconduct." Henry read it twice, jaw clenched, resolved for who he asked aloud. Then quietly, "Find her. Apologize. offer full reimbursement, and seat her in 2A. Meanwhile, Sophia Bennett sat alone in her apartment, away from the media noise. She watched the clip of herself on Harper's footage frame by frame, every glance, every phrase, the moment her eyes narrowed as she said, "This ticket must be stolen." She paused the video, then pressed rewind, and whispered to no one. I said that, like I believed it. It haunted her more than the termination. Not because she lost her job, because she lost herself. In Houston, a gate agent filed a report. She had stopped a Latino man boarding with his 3 kids, said she just wanted to double-check his first-class status. The man was polite, but another passenger recorded the moment. 2 days later, the agent was reassigned, and a full reevaluation of her training log was ordered. This time, the system didn't bury it. This time, Skyfare kicked in. Back at Skylight HQ, a decision loomed whether to make the Skyfare directive public. A press event, full rollout, transparency at scale. The board was nervous. One exec said, "We'll look like we've been ignoring this." Harper, who had been invited as a guest, answered, "You have, but now you're choosing not to, and that's what will matter." Henry agreed, so he took the podium. Not in a suit, not in luxury branding. In a hoodie, the same one. He didn't use corporate jargon. He used truth. We didn't get better. We got caught. But from today forward, Skylight will be an airline that earns every seat, not just sells it. He paused, then added, "And if you're ever asked, what gives you the right to sit here? The answer is simple. Because I do." Dramatic climax, end of part 16. That night, the Skyfare portal went live. Passengers could now submit crew conduct reviews in real-time tag incidents, upload video, and track investigations like package deliveries. No more vanished reports. No more brushed-off complaints. Each submission ended with the words, "Your voice is not turbulence, it's navigation." Henry received a message an hour later from a 10-year-old girl who watched the press event with her mother. "My mom said I can wear my hair how I like now. She said the sky is safer for me. I want to sit in 2A one day. Like you," Henry responded. "You won't need to fight for it, but if you do, don't whisper." Because altitude wasn't just measured in feet, it was measured in courage. 10 days had passed since Flight SE-247, and Skylight Airlines was no longer the same company, nor was the world that watched it fall and then choose to rise. What began with a hoodie and a boarding pass had become a movement, not because of how loud Henry Carter had been, but because of how thoroughly he'd refused to back down. He didn't demand, he demonstrated. He didn't rant, he rewrote, and now, Skyfare was law. Internal surveys flooded in. Passengers reported a 32% increase in felt respect during the boarding process. Crew members anonymously submitted comments like, "I didn't realize how many assumptions I made until I was told to name them. I used to call it protocol. Now I know it was prejudgment." Lucas stood in front of a new training class, this one composed entirely of regional directors. "Today isn't about compliance," he said. "It's about confrontation. Because the only way to dismantle a system is to confront how comfortable it was to build." One director raised a hand. "What if we're afraid to say the wrong thing?" Lucas smiled sadly. Then you're ready. Sophia Bennett. Once the enforcer of exclusion, now reviewed a different kind of paperwork, a formal request to join Skylight's ethics division as a civilian case reviewer. In her handwritten note, she wrote, "I'm not asking for reinstatement. I'm asking to help fix what I broke." Her fate was undecided, but her courage to name her role in the problem. That, at least, was new. Henry sat on a panel hosted by a national aviation summit. Beside him, Harper Lee, Mateo Cruz, and the CEO of a rival airline who had called Skyfair performative just a week earlier. Harper responded with facts. Skylight logged 47 formal bias incident reversals since Skyfair launched. How many has your airline reversed? Silence. Then, Henry spoke, if accountability feels like theater, that's because you've mistaken silence for virtue. But the sky doesn't forget. Meanwhile, Mateo initiated the first cross-airline audit exchange. Let's compare complaint data. Publicly, he told the ethics leads of 3 major carriers. Only one agreed. Henry praised that carrier in an op-ed the next morning. The others, they stayed silent, and the public noticed. Passengers began filming less, not because they weren't vigilant, but because they were being seen. In Houston, a woman in seat 3D was told, "Welcome back, Ms. Davis. Thank you for flying with us." She froze. "Wait, you remembered me," the attendant replied. "Skyfair logs preferences now, and respect." At JFK, a new gate sign was quietly installed. Everyone has a right to fly with dignity. Seat checks are for safety, not suspicion. Beneath it, Skyfair compliant zone. It wasn't loud, it was clear. Dramatic climax, end of part 17. One night, Henry boarded a red-eye to San Francisco. No crew fanfare, no whispers, just nods of recognition. But midway through the flight, a teenage boy approached from coach. Hoodie, backpack, nervous energy. "Sir, sorry to bother you." Henry smiled. "You're not." The boy held up his phone, screen showing the Skyfair video. "That was you." Henry nodded. The boy grinned, eyes shining. "I didn't think I could go into tech. I didn't think they'd ever see me like, legit. But after watching that, I thought maybe I can own something one day too." Henry replied, "You already own your story. One day, you'll fly in 2A, not because of what you wear, but because of what you won't accept." The boy nodded, then walked back to his seat, shoulders higher. And Henry looked out the window, knowing that one conversation had done what thousands of policies couldn't. Because the sky doesn't forget, but neither does a kid who finally feels seen. It was raining in Atlanta when Henry Carter stepped into the Skylight Regional Office, clipboard in hand, hoodie zipped halfway, and expression unreadable. He wasn't here for ceremony. He was here for clarity. Mateo met him in the lobby. 15 unresolved cases. 3 flagged for potential internal suppression. 1 involves a child who was denied priority boarding because a gate agent didn't believe he was flying unaccompanied until his white guardian showed up. Henry raised an eyebrow. And what did the report say? Mateo grimaced. Filed under boarding confusion. Henry looked away. Let's fix the language before we fix the people. Inside the review room, A digital screen displayed live sentiment data from Skyfare's passenger logs. Green bars meant passengers felt seen. Red bars meant assumed, misjudged, or questioned. That day's average 61% green. Not good enough. Not yet. Lucas stood beside the projector, now fluent in metrics he once ignored. He tapped a red cluster. This flight Newark to Orlando, 3 profiling complaints. All about appearance. Henry asked, "Was anyone disciplined?" Lucas nodded. 2 verbal warnings. 1 crew member took voluntary retraining. Harper, seated in the corner, said, "Voluntary isn't a fix. It's a delay." Henry agreed. We need truth trigger training. The moment a bias is admitted, action should initiate, not wait. At Skylight headquarters, a new clause had just been added to every employment contract. No employee may alter passenger status based on appearance alone. Any manifest modification without evidence must be logged and reviewed by Skyfare Ethics. It was the first policy in Utah's aviation history to criminalize assumption. And it bore Henry Carter's name in the margin. Meanwhile, Sophia Bennett sat across from an HR panel, reading a prepared statement. Not a defense, a confession. I mistook instinct for insight. I mistook fear for protocol. I saw a hoodie, and I saw a lie because I was trained to. She placed her badge on the table. Again. Let my failure be a first page, not a footnote. They listened. And for the first time since her dismissal, someone nodded. Not in forgiveness. In recognition, back in Atlanta, Henry reviewed a complaint from an older gentleman. He had worn traditional West African attire and was asked by a flight attendant if he was on the correct plane. The man had answered kindly. I fly this route monthly, but his report had been tagged language barrier. Henry underlined the file, reclassify it, and send me his number. Later that evening, Henry called the man personally. I read what happened. I want to offer my apology and a seat in 2A on your next flight. My gift, not because of status, but because of truth. The man replied, "Son, I don't need the seat. I just needed someone to read what I wrote." And now that someone has, I'm already flying? Henry smiled. At that same moment, Harper sat with a Skyfare design team. They were creating new onboarding videos, live-action training scenes, and AI-modeled bias detection prompts. But she stopped them mid-presentation. Where's the part where the crew admits they were wrong? Silence. Harper tapped the table. If they never say it out loud in the simulation, how will they ever say it at 35,000 feet? They rewrote the scene. Right then and there. Dramatic climax, end of part 18. Henry received a call from a young flight attendant named Raya. She was crying. I just filed my first internal bias complaint against my supervisor. Henry asked gently, "Did you feel safe?" "No," she replied, "but I felt seen." He paused, then said, "That's how legacy begins. Not when we feel safe, but when we choose to be seen anyway." He hung up, turned to Mateo, and said, "Every manifest we print carries a message. Either you don't belong, or we're ready to see you. Let's make sure every single one says the latter." And with that, he opened the next case file. Ready to correct not just a system, but a culture that once forgot the cost of silence. The next Skylight Town Hall wasn't held in a boardroom. It was held on a plane. Flight 9900 was grounded on the tarmac, doors open, engines silent, in the first-class cabin. Skylight's senior leadership team took their seats not as executives, but as listeners. Flight attendants, pilots, gate agents, and customer service reps filled every row, and standing in the aisle holding a mic was Henry Carter. Wearing the same hoodie, no slides, no script, just one line to begin. Welcome to the flight that changed our direction. Today, this cabin is a courtroom. Harper stood behind him, tablet in hand, scrolling through de-identified case files from the last 12 months. She read one aloud. Passenger in 1A was asked to prove identity 3 times. Flight attendant later stated, "He just didn't look like a Diamond Elite." Murmurs. Henry added, "We didn't write that sentence, but we allowed it." Mateo projected a Skyfair dashboard on the in-cabin screen. 913 complaints. 72% involved appearance-based assumptions. 11 active crew under internal review. 1437 staff retrained, but it wasn't the numbers that silenced the room. It was the truth behind them. A crew member from Denver raised her hand. "My trainer told me, if the shoes don't shine, double-check the name." I thought it was caution. Now I know. It was bias. Henry nodded. Who else was told to follow that logic? 10 hands rose. The silence wasn't shame. It was exposure. Lucas, sitting near the rear, stood. I enforced that logic. For years. I never questioned it until someone made me see what I was protecting. Another voice came from the jump seat. I used to tell new hires to trust their instincts, but my instincts were built in someone else's image. Harper read another complaint. Passenger in 2B escorted off flight for disruption. Later proved to be a surgeon en route to emergency surgery. Delay cost the hospital 4 hours. A gasp. Henry looked at the row of executives. This is what unchecked assumption costs, not just dignity outcomes. Then, a voice from the rear. Why do you think it took a shareholder to fix this? Why couldn't we do it from within? Henry didn't flinch. Because systems protect themselves until someone forces transparency from the outside. He pointed to Harper. She filmed it. That was the breach. The opening. But all of you right now, you're the architects of what comes next. The overhead lights dimmed. A video played. It showed Henry's encounter from Flight SE-247 raw footage, audio, timestamps, Sophia's voice. You don't belong in 2A. Lucas's response. Just get security. Ethan Ward's insult. He probably stole the ticket. Henry's quiet reply. You don't know who I am, but you will. The clip ended on Henry placing his ID beside his boarding pass. Silence, then applause. Not out of admiration, but out of reckoning. Henry took the mic again. I didn't film that moment to punish anyone. I filmed it to document the pattern. And today, I ask you to do the same. He pulled a blank passenger manifest from his folder. I want this in every training packet. A page with no names, just space. Every time you look at a person, ask yourself, am I reading a name or writing a story that isn't mine to tell? Dramatic climax, end of part 19. The cabin door opened. Sophia Bennett stepped in. Not escorted, not hidden, invited. She stood in front of the crew, nervous, but firm. I was the mistake, she said. But I'm not the end. I'm the warning. The one who didn't pause. The one who thought a hoodie meant danger. I was wrong. The room didn't cheer. It absorbed. Then she said, if I had just asked for ID instead of jumping to judgment, none of this would have happened. So now I ask you, don't wait until you're on someone's footage to see the truth. She turned to Henry. Thank you for making it count. He nodded. Not out of approval, but out of closure. Henry looked around the cabin one last time and said, this isn't the final flight. This is the first one that finally landed. Safely, transparently, and permanently grounded in truth. Then he stepped into the aisle, ready to close the chapter and begin the legacy. The footage from Flight SE-247 didn't just trend. It transformed, not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. A hoodie, a boarding pass, a false accusation, and a man who didn't raise his voice, he raised a mirror. Henry Carter never wanted to go viral. He wanted to go to New York. But when power met assumption, when silence collided with surveillance, when dignity got shoved to the back of the plane, he stood still, not with rage. With recording, 3 months later, Skyfair had been adopted by 5 other airlines. 2 more were in negotiation. Harper Lee was now executive advisor of aviation ethics for an international watchdog group, training regulators on how to identify systemic bias before it made headlines. Mateo Cruz had been promoted to Chief Compliance Officer. Lucas Reed remained in his new role, leading onboarding sessions with his own failure as the case study. Sophia Bennett's words were now quoted in every Skylight training video. I thought I was doing my job, but I was doing my fear. And Henry, he didn't take a title. He didn't claim the victory. Instead, he started a foundation altitude equity offering scholarships to first-generation aviation students, specifically those who had ever been told, "You don't belong here." The application only required one essay prompt. Describe the moment you decided to be seen. One student, a 17-year-old Nigerian-American girl from Boston, wrote, "It was when my mother showed me the Skyfair video and said, 'This man didn't yell. He corrected. That's power.'" She was later selected to intern at Skylight. Her first assignment: digitize all legacy complaint logs before Skyfair so no one could erase the past again. The hoodie Henry wore on that flight was eventually framed not in a museum, but in Skylight's ethics office. Below it, a plaque, Flight SE-247. Dignity boarded. Power followed. Policy landed. And beneath that, do not forget, the sky was never neutral. We made it that way. Now, we unmake it. Sophia Bennett, still barred from active duty, became a quiet consultant for airlines retraining biased systems. She never appeared in promotional videos. She never reclaimed her wings. But one day, she gave a private keynote to a new crew class. No press, no script. She ended her talk by saying, "I lost my job, but I gained my honesty. And sometimes, that's the only way to earn a new kind of uniform." The room stood to applaud, but she asked them to sit. "You're not here to clap," she said. You're here to remember, every seat you check is a test, and someone like Henry will always be watching. And Henry, he kept flying, always in 2A. Always in that same hoodie, not to prove a point. But because the moment he traded his comfort for correction, he made that seat mean something more. Not VIP. Not status, just belonging. One evening, on a transatlantic flight to Geneva, a young white flight attendant approached him shyly. "Sir, may I ask you something?" Henry folded his newspaper. "Of course." She hesitated. "When you sat down in 2A that day, did you already know what you were going to do?" He smiled gently. "No, I just knew I wasn't going to move." She nodded slowly, misty-eyed, "And thank you for not moving, because you moved everything else instead." When the flight landed, passengers deboarded in silence, not because they were tired, because they knew they had shared space with someone who didn't shout. He rewrote, someone who didn't retaliate. He recalibrated, someone who didn't seek power for himself but built a platform for others. And now, to you who listened to this story all the way through, if you've ever been told you don't belong in the room, if someone ever looked at you and made you feel like a counterfeit, if you've ever had to prove your place twice just to be left alone, then remember this: it's not your clothing, it's their lens. And your silence doesn't make you small, but your courage, that changes the altitude for everyone. So let this be the legacy. You don't have to wear a suit to own the sky. You just have to stand. Even when it feels like no one is watching, because justice always boards quietly. But it lands loud. Final Sétier. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Every flight has a story, and every seat has a lesson. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.